Alright, when we last left off with week 15, we were going into week 16 to take a second week of diet break. I also mentioned that while I normally only look at the average for weight by week instead of looking at singular days, in this case it might make more sense to look at the last couple days of the previous week because her weight had been fairly elevated from her period. So in this case, I thought it would make more sense to look at that, otherwise she was almost certainly going to see a huge drop in the weekly average. And as you can see, that's exactly what did happen. She lost on average 2.8 pounds from the week prior. But even then, comparing the last couple days, she was still down about a pound from those numbers. And if you can drop a pound while on a diet break, well, that is a freaking huge win and a nice added bonus. Now, one of the things she asked me in her check-in was why I thought that she was seeing these drops in the scale on the break. And she was wondering if maybe it was depleted glycogen stores or lower sodium than usual, or if I actually thought it was actual changes in body composition. And what I told her was I thought it was a few different things. First, looking at the pictures, especially from 2 weeks prior, there were some clear changes in body comp as her waist and the legs are looking tighter. And honestly, I noticed this even before I went with the side-by-side. As soon as I opened up the email, I could tell her body was changing. I really don't think it's glycogen depletion because her carbs have been up since she's been on the diet break. And as far as the sodium goes, I told her it could be part of it, and what she could do if she really wanted to look further is go back into her tracker on MyFitnessPal and look at the weekly average, because that will track sodium in there, and look at 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, and then the last week. And she actually did this and did see that it was going down. So 3 weeks ago it was about 2,100, and then the next week it was about 1,500, and then the last week it was about 1,100. So that could be part of it. But then again, with sodium, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't get tracked, especially if you cook with more stuff like soy sauce like she tends to do. So I honestly wouldn't get too tied up into that. That said, I personally think in this instance, it's more related to her having more energy and getting more activity in and feeling better from the diet break, and her steps have been up quite a bit the last few weeks, doing about 10, 11,000 steps a day, whereas prior she was only doing about 4,000 to 5,000. So she's just getting more steps in, doing more activity in general because she has more energy, and her body is digging it. And as a side note, she did mention since weight was dropping and she was in a diet break, she went ahead and skipped 30 minutes of her cardio and figured it wasn't that big of a deal on a diet break, which I definitely had no problem with. So with all that being said, she was still losing, so we went ahead and just kept things the same and decided to extend her diet break into week 17 and wait for things to slow down before we get back into cutting macros and cardio. Which that's essentially what week 17 brought. Weight did trickle down still some, about 1/4 pound, and measurements have been coming down the last couple weeks as well, but I thought it just made sense at this point to get back into the cutting macros and push for more fat loss. Now remember, the whole reason we started the diet break to begin with was because she was just feeling more food focused, a little bit run down, and just wanted a break, but at that time she was in a good position. So coming back, I'm not going to adjust anything from her previous macros prior to the diet break, and just roll with that, and that should get things going. Now I did mention a couple things to her as we went into week 18. One was while we're going back to a double refeed approach as we go back into the cutting, I did recommend that as we start this, she either takes the 2 refeed days right away and essentially extends the diet break for another 2 days. Instead of using the refeed numbers, which are a little bit lower, I said just go ahead and keep doing the diet break numbers, or wait until the end of the week to take the 2 days. And this is because if we're looking to do what's most optimal, I don't think it would be smart to go 2 days back on dieting and then immediately follow it up with 2 days of higher calories. Just because since she's essentially been on higher carbs now for 3 weeks, I don't want to just deplete her glycogen stores right away, not have tapped into any fat stores, and then just immediately replenish glycogen stores again and then go back. So what I told her, what I thought would be most optimal would be just take 2 more days of the diet break and then go to low calories for the rest of this week and the beginning of next week before going to her normal schedule that she likes of having the high days on Friday and Saturday. So this would give her 8 days of lower calories before taking the 2 high days. But I also mentioned that this is basically just doing everything we can to do as much as possible to get the best results possible, but the results would be negligible from this, and if she just really wanted that Friday, Saturday, I had no problems with that. So we'll see what she decides to do and how she responded in the next update. And the second thing I told her was I wanted her to really try to keep her steps up now, as it's obviously helping quite a bit, and if you've watched many of my previous videos, you already know how big of a fan I am and how powerful extra walking can be when it comes to a fat loss phase. And another thing that can be smart, in my opinion, is to not track your steps if you're gonna do things like running for cardio, because that tends to skew things. For instance, what can be common if you're tracking your steps is once you start increasing your normal cardio, you start getting more steps from that cardio, and therefore you end up taking taking less steps than you did before and negate a lot of that extra calorie burn. So if you take your tracker off when you're doing the actual running or forms of cardio that you do, you have a more accurate baseline for normal steps throughout a day. Anyway, looking at the process as a whole, she's now down 12.71 pounds from the start of her cut in 17 weeks. But you need to remember 6 of those weeks were diet break weeks, so essentially she's been truly cutting for 11 of those weeks. Remembering that we only want to lose at max about 1% of body weight per week on average, that basically puts her on almost the perfect pace to not only make sure she's retaining as much muscle mass as possible, but also keep her metabolism as good a place as possible so we can keep making adjustments and keep the process working better long term. I know we all tend to want faster weight loss, but faster weight loss is usually the thing that gets you stuck and ends up making you give up and put the weight back on. And if you want to know more about why starving yourself tends to make you fatter, make sure you check out this top video and I'll explain what happens when you do starve yourself. Otherwise, I think you'll like this bottom video. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below, and I'll see you next time.